Well, ladies and gentlemen, it never ends. There's a very important piece in Real Clear Investigations by Steve Miller. Real Clear Investigations. He's writing there, not Stephen Miller, Steve Miller. Leftist groups tapping $1 billion to vastly expand the private financing of public elections. So they're up to no damn good. And I wanted Steve Miller to come on the program to discuss this with you. Steve Miller, nice to meet you. Tell me what you're talking about here.
Hi, Mark. What we're talking about is, it's really a strategy that Democrats have managed to become trainers of election officials, and they've been able to generate favorable media coverage by setting up interviews between elections offices and media outlets, placing op-eds in local newspapers, and essentially been able to, kind of shape how elections administration is run. In part, I guess, as you've covered before, from the private grants that were given starting in 2020 from some of these more progressive groups to elections administrators.
So the deal is they give them money, which they want, and the money has strings attached, and they have to pretty much do what these radical left private entities want in order to get the money. So they know they have to do what these left-wing groups want, and it's all under the mirage of providing support to expand election opportunities, right?
The idea being what used to be the domain of the political parties to register voters, get the vote out, becomes more now under these grants. And it's again, they're doing this willingly, is to generate more voters. Again, register more voters, get more people to the polls. Generally, the people that are harder to get to the polls, which tend to trend Democrat.
You say here many of these progressive groups seeking to influence elections are connected to the group Arabella Advisors, a Washington-based firm, for-profit consulting company. Explain how that whole Rube Goldberg operation works.
I don't know if I'd characterize it like that, but that's fair. What they do is Arabella is really kind of a management company, and what they do is they advise, and you'll see it in their annual reports. They advise their clients, such as the New Venture Fund, Hopewell Fund, 1630 funds, and Secure Democracy, which is really an arm of the New Venture Fund. And they kind of help them manage how they run their operations. And Arabella is a for-profit. The other funds I mentioned, things I mentioned, are nonprofit. And so Arabella is a large group with a lot of money. We found that combined, those New Venture Fund, Hopewell, 1630, and Secure Democracy had combined revenues of $1.3 billion between 2020 and 21. That's a lot of money, and they spread it around. It's not just focused on elections, but they have environmental causes and other, pet causes for progressives and Democrats. And so it's just a lot of money to toss around, and some of that goes to grants. It has gone to grants to public, elections administrators, your local elections office.
Now, we've talked about it here, Zuckbucks or Zuckerbucks in 2020. And Molly Hemingway's written about it as well. Tell everybody what that means again.
Well, conservatives refer to this, the money that Mark Zuckerberg and his wife gave, $350 million, primarily to one group called Center for Tech and Civic Life, to distribute to the state elections offices. Generally, they'll go. Some will go to the states for distribution. Some will go directly to your county or your city elections office, and those are to be used for. In 2020, it was presumably to be used for COVID-related problems, but it didn't turn out that way. What we found previously, it went to commercials. It went to all kinds of get-out-the-vote efforts. In Wisconsin, they actually set up tables to register same-day voters and mail ballot processing, things like that. So that's Zuckbucks, and that's what that went to, and that was 2020. We don't see any indication that Zuckerberg is giving out any money so far for the 2024.
Do you see any indication that conservative groups are doing any of this?
would love to see that, because we would report it just as thoroughly as we did. We'd report that just as thoroughly, by the way, as if Democratic groups would do it. Because there's a lot of people, and what we hear now from conservatives say, well, look, we don't want anybody from the outside. This is a government domain. We fund the elections. But I would love to see that. But no, there's no indication. The conservative groups have shown any indication of giving grants to elections offices. It'd be a great story, by the way. And again, we'd covered that just as thoroughly as we would in this case.
And I don't doubt that. But my point isn't that. My point is, you got one group that's tied to the Democrat Party that's spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and then you have no group tied to the Republican Party trying to counter this in Republican areas. And I'm just pointing that out for the audience. This is, in my view, how you lose some of these elections, because the other side is 3 steps ahead. And also, you point out in your article that some of these states have tried to close this. They view it as a loophole, or however they view it, with respect to these private funding of these what are formerly government activities. And like in Georgia and so forth, you point out, well, there's a loophole, and they got around some of this. Correct?
That is correct, yes. And in fact, the Republican response to this was not to meet fire with fire, but it was, in fact, to try to ban the private funding. That was their first step, is let's just stop this private funding. And in 24 states passed forms of legislation they felt might close that, close the ability of these groups to provide private grants. It turned out, in the article you see, DeKalb County, Georgia, it was not foolproof, and they figured out a way around it, and we detail that in the story. But yeah, you're right. Overall, it doesn't seem like conservatives are willing, in fact, to engage in this. Instead, they'd rather just shut it down. And also in the story at the end, Mac Warner, Secretary of State in West Virginia, said, maybe it's time that we just kind of work on doing the same thing.
Yeah, maybe it is. And I've been talking about that, too, because I don't like all this stuff. But if they're not going to put an end to it, then you can't leave the playing field one party, leave it to the other. Otherwise, you're going to have very disappointing election outcomes over and over and over again. Give us a little bit of information on your background.
Oh, I've been a journalist for about 30 years, and covered election fraud, elections, let's just say elections really intensively since about 2012. But I was there for election 2000 on the ground in Florida.
Wow.
I was a reporter for the Washington Times at that time, and just over the years covered all kinds of election fraud. Really, the Politicaros down in South Texas, covered that, and so on. That's real mail-in ballot fraud. That was actual fraud that was prosecuted, and so it's just been an interest of mine for years. Well,
you've done a great job. You really have, and I've been watching you over a few years that I've been around, and I want to thank you. This is a great piece, and I want to thank you for coming on.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Be well.